I'm Amy at EuroluxHome.com. Welcome back to our historical overview of the styles of European antique furniture. If you've been enjoying this series, then remember to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and maybe even share it with a friend who might enjoy learning about European antiques. Today we're talking about the Louis XVI style. Behind me is a late 19th century piece, but the style originally started in the late 18th century. It's also called neoclassicism. And in order for you to understand what neoclassicism is about, we need to look back at the previous style, which was the Rococo style, or also called the Louis XV style. We did make a video about that, and so make sure you go and check that out. But the Louis XVI style was a reaction against the thought that the Louis XV or the Rococo style was overly ornate and was frivolous. And so let's remember about the Louis XV style so that you really have an understanding of what this reaction is. So we'll take a look at one of the classical works of Rococo art, which is Fragonard's The Swing, the painting. And so this is considered the quintessential Rococo piece because it shows all of the hallmarks of the Rococo style. So first of all, it's very playful and lighthearted. The theme is love and flirtation and leisure. We have an aristocratic lady, she's swinging, and if you notice down at the bottom, there's a courter or a suitor down in the bushes, and as she swings, he's actually sort of looking up her skirt. So a little erotic and scandalous, but excessive, and it was all about the aristocracy. It's a very pastel color palette. We have light pinks and light blues and greens. It creates sort of a dreamy atmosphere. And it's asymmetrical, and there's also this sense of dynamic movement. You really see the leaves moving in the trees, and you get the sense of her swinging there in space. And so it, of course, also is completely filled with ornate details. All of the ruffles on her dress, there's a pattern. The foliage is very ornate. And so that gives you a look back at this Rococo or Louis XV style. And what was happening in society was that Louis XV had been on the throne with Madame du Pompadour. Now, Louis XV was also known as Louis the Well-Loved because of all of these scandalous relationships that he had with women other than the Queen, and Madame du Pompadour was his favorite. And so her style really became the Rococo style, and her slogan, if you wanted to give her a slogan, was "More is more." So very ornate, just almost exuberant extravagance. That's a great way to describe the Rococo style. So now that you understand what was happening, now we look at what was going on in society that would cause a reaction against this style. So if we look at what's happening, the 17th and 18th century is the age of Enlightenment. So it's also known as the age of reason. And we have philosophers and scholars who are beginning to challenge the status quo. They're challenging traditional beliefs and superstitions. They're challenging the absolute monarchy, the authoritarian control by the government. They are questioning social injustice that they're seeing in society. They are pursuing knowledge to better mankind. So there's this great focus on reason, on science, and especially individual rights. Enlightenment scholars that you might be familiar with are Voltaire or Rousseau, and also Adam Smith. So we have this idea of what's happening in society, this shift toward reason and science. And then in 1748, we have a huge discovery. Pompeii and Herculaneum were discovered in Italy. If you're not familiar with those cities, they were two cities that are located right at the base of Mount Vesuvius. And all the way back in 79 AD, Mount Vesuvius erupted, and all of the ash came down suddenly over Pompeii and Herculaneum and killed everyone and basically froze those towns in time. They were just completely covered with ash. They're amazing places to visit if you ever get the chance to visit. Very interesting. But what happened with this discovery is that suddenly it created this craze for all things Greco-Roman. And there becomes a great focus on looking at Greco-Roman architecture. So a quintessential example of Greco-Roman architecture would be the Pantheon in Rome. And right now, at this time, in the mid to late 18th century, we have the building of the Pantheon in Paris. And we also have this focus on the Greco-Roman style spreads to the United States. If you remember, 1776 is when we were breaking away from England, and so that age of Enlightenment was also coming over to the United States. And so that's what our federal style, our own Capitol building and the White House in Washington, D.C. are based on this neoclassical style. So what happens? This is what's going on in the background, this craze for Greco-Roman things, a focus on architecture, Greco-Roman architecture. We're seeing it in art such as David. And now we have Louis XVI coming to the throne at the end of the 18th century. Now, Louis XVI was married to Marie Antoinette, and they were very young when they got married. They were just 14 and 15 years old. And of course, it was an arranged marriage. It was a political alliance. She was the youngest daughter of the Holy Roman Emperor Francis I and Empress Maria Theresa of the Habsburgs, very important political, very powerful family in Europe. And Louis XVI was grandson of Louis XV. So you have these two young people coming to the throne, and they inherit a country that is heavily in debt. Madame du Pompadour and Louis XV spent a lot of money on all of that extravagant decorative arts and art and sculpture and architecture. And so when Louis XVI takes the throne, he is very heavily in debt. The country is very heavily in debt. But he and Marie Antoinette spend like crazy. They are known for having lavish parties. And of course, when they move into Versailles and take over the court, they want a completely new style. So out with the Louis XV or the Rococo style, and they want to embrace this new aesthetic that's happening in society, neoclassicism. So they begin to decorate Versailles with neoclassical pieces. And we will then turn and talk about the hallmarks of this style now that you have a better understanding of the history of what is happening to create the style. So now we'll go check out some pieces. So now we're looking at the hallmarks of the Louis XVI style or neoclassicism. And remember that Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette have just come to the throne. They're very young, and they want to throw out everything that their grandfather, Louis XV, had done and create their own new style. And they want the new aesthetic, which is all about Greco-Roman because of that discovery of Pompeii and Herculaneum. So what we're going to find are classical architectural elements. And we will see fluted columns and friezes, pediments, and especially laurel leaves, which we find right up here at the top. Laurel leaves, these carved leaves, were a symbol of victory, and Julius Caesar put them all over architecture and in art back when he was on the throne. And then we have urns. This is a classical thing that's seen in Greco-Roman mosaics and murals. We find references to classical mythological stories. So everything Greco-Roman is what we find in the neoclassical piece. So here we have an example of the fluted column. We have little rosette carving, some flourishes, and then we come all the way down to this straight leg. So we're moving away from those curves and the cabriole leg in the Louis XV style, and now we have these straight fluted columns with our straight leg, hallmark of the Louis XVI style. So let's go and we'll check out another piece. Right over here is a very beautiful Louis XVI bed. Now, probably what's popping off right away is all of these beautiful bronze ormolu mounts. All of this is metal, and it's all handmade. Here we have a little ribbon. It's this straight fluted, looks like a ribbon. And then it's completely covered in ribbons and roses. Now, you might think that still looks a little gussy, a little ornate, and you have to understand that these styles didn't stop one day and start the next day. So we have an overflow. The last piece we looked at had a great big kind of curving mirror. This one does have some curve, but in general, it is more symmetrical, more proportional, a little more restrained than the Louis XV style, where we saw these big swooping curves all over the place. And even right here, we have sort of the idea of a pediment, an architectural pediment at the top. But it is said that Marie Antoinette loved ribbons and roses, and so you do have an ornateness to this. This is probably the most ornate part of the style. But overall, it's still, in comparison to Louis XV, more restrained. We have more laurel leaves here, part of the style. We have an intersecting pattern and even an idealized column from Greece and Rome. We also have, as part of the Louis XVI style, pieces tend to be a little more petite, more diminutive. We see more accent tables, more little vanity tables around. And we also find marquetry, and we'll look at another piece for that. While I'm here, I'll go ahead and show you, this is an example of a neoclassical Louis XVI chair. What probably catches your eye and how you'll remember this style are these straight fluted legs, has this idea of a ribbon going around. And while we do have a curve, it's very restrained, it's proportional, it's symmetrical, very nice fabric. Now this is a late 19th century piece, as is the bed behind me, but they are representative of this classical style. This even has inlay, exotic satin wood inlay, and I believe the chair is rosewood, so beautiful woods. So let's go look at a few more. We'll come right through here. So even though we've already looked at another bed, I thought I would show you another example, because while that one was a little fussier, a little more ornate, still considered Louis XVI, this one is a little more rectilinear. We do have a curve, but it's not a big ornate S curve or a C curve. We do have this ribbon flying in the wind, but here we have these little balls, and they're actually pomegranates. So that's a nod back to mythology, Greco-Roman reference. And then we have this beautiful marquetry pattern. Now, marquetry is where you take little squares of veneer and put them together like a puzzle to create a pattern. It's very labor intensive, and it just is a way to look very fancy and ornate and aristocratic, but yet still be reserved. We do have here on the foot more bronze ormolu mounts and swags of flowers and ribbons waving in the wind. And we do have straight legs on there. So our Louis XVI straight legs. And so I'll also show you a chair. Again, it's the legs, so you'll go straight to the legs and you see these straight fluted legs. So you'll know that's a tip-off for you that it's a Louis XVI or neoclassical style. Here the carving all around the edge is that ribbon motif. And it's very reserved. It's not lots of curves. It's just very simple and elegant, and that's hallmarks of the style. So let's come over here and we'll look at another example. So marquetry pattern, we have the pretty design, very elegant. Overall, it has more of a rectilinear, straight line feeling. We do have an idea of a column, a fluted column, going down to a fluted leg. And we have these bronze ormolu mounts in these Greco-Roman styles. Here we have a rosette. Even the drawer pull is our laurel leaf motif. And this is just beautiful marble, a really pretty, just a softer color palette with the Louis XVI style. So moving away from the soft pastels to more just sort of neutral colors. And I thought that it would be great for you to see this piece in comparison to a Louis XV piece. So just pointing your eye, so this one, more straight lines. This one, we have our curves. And this one, it's symmetry, proportion, balance, neoclassical. Whereas over here we come, not only do we have these dynamic swooping curve, but look at the asymmetrical hardware. So asymmetry was an important part of that Rococo style. Now we do have marquetry, which this is inlaid flowers in different exotic woods. So again, this idea of the style didn't start on one day and end on another day, or end on one day and start on the next day. There's an overflowing. And both of these are late 19th century pieces that are an expression of the neoclassical style that developed under Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette at the end of the 18th century. So we'll look at one more piece. This is where we started. And I think again now you'll recognize our straight fluted columns, our straight legs, our bronze ormolu mounts. And you do have a gentle curve, but overall you have a sense of symmetry, balance, proportion. So I believe most of you know what happened to Louis XVI. His reign and his life was cut short because the French Revolution happened, which was a major world-turning event. In 1789, the people of France rose up. And so why did they rise up? What caused the French Revolution? Well, I mentioned back when Louis XVI took the throne, the country was already in great debt, and he and Marie Antoinette just kept spending. They decorated Versailles with all this beautiful neoclassical furniture. They had lavish parties. They spent and spent and spent. Not only that, but Louis XVI was a great supporter of us, the Americans, in our American Revolution, because he saw that it was a way to turn the screw against his rival of England. And so he spent gobs of money supporting the American Revolution, which put France further in debt. Eventually, it reached the point where there were food shortages, there was skyrocketing inflation, and the government just kept taxing the people, just raising taxes more and more and more to cover what the government itself was spending, the corruption of the government, and to pay for this American Revolution. And so the French people eventually reached the breaking point. They'd had enough with this absolutism, this absolute monarchy. They had enough of the corruption, and they rose up and arrested Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, and eventually executed them both with the guillotine. So they lost their heads. And the French Revolution swept the country and changed the world, as did our American Revolution. And so we have these Enlightenment ideas. Remember, that's what was going on in the background behind what's happening, is this focus on reason, on rationality, on bucking the old traditions, on questioning authority, and creating a new world order, one based on liberty, equality, and fraternity. And so that is the summation then for the Louis XVI style. I hope that it makes it more realistic to you to have an understanding of what's going on in society so that when you are out antiquing, you'll be able to identify those hallmarks and identify the style. So be sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and maybe share it with a friend so that you don't miss our next episode. See you soon.